All right, gang, howdy. It's Labor Day today, but it's also the second week of class, and I'm super busy tomorrow, Tuesday. So I'm going to be recording this week's video today. Probably should have done it yesterday, but my wife and I had a nice pool day together while the kids were inside. So I hope you're enjoying your Labor Day, your long weekend, and I'm going to try to do both of, not going to try to, I'm going to do both of the readings for this week in one video. So that's two sections from the Perloff book, the Dynamics of Persuasion book, which is not assigned or required. I'm just pulling different sections out in the early weeks of the class, just because this seems like one of the better, big comprehensive books on persuasion, theories of persuasion, principles, histories, and so on. But we're not doing a serious deep dive on all of the different theories of persuasion. We're just trying to work through some of the most well-known, most successful, most sort of well-established theories and models and paradigms. And even there, what I really want to be focusing on are mostly the elements of the model themselves, and what are the models working with, and what are they presuming, right? Is what are they kind of based on, right? So talk about the reasoned action model first. I think we can do that pretty quick, and then we'll get into the elaboration likelihood model after that, and that one has a little bit more going on. They're both interesting, and there's some key little bits and pieces along the way that we want to be familiar with. And as I reminded everyone last week, we've got these notes. They're right below the readings on the Canvas page. There's one for each reading. Directly below, again, they're meant to just help focus things down and really just kind of help you be confident on what is the key stuff that we want to be drilling down on. So, first we've got Perloff Theory of Reasoned Action. This kicks in on page 95. And again, this isn't even the whole chapter. You're not seeing the beginning of a chapter and the chapter heading. We're in the middle of a chapter. We're just sort of looking at a part of it here. And in the middle of the first page, it says models of attitude, behavior, relations, right? So in last week's videos and content, we talked about attitudes already, and we talked about the relationship between attitude and action or behavior. And I called attitudes incipient action, drawing on Kenneth Burke there, right? And so attitudes are super important because they orient and steer the individual toward behavior, toward action. They might not be in the moment action itself, but it's a really good kind of bellwether for what could happen and maybe likely will happen, but not necessarily, right? But there's a close relationship there. And right off the bat, you can, just looking at the language in that little first mini paragraph there, it notes that people are complex, and then there's some language on what follows kind of pertains to some people, some circumstances, under certain conditions, right? So there's lots of kind of hedging of the language here, which suggests that we're dealing with a probabilistic phenomenon. This, again, gets back to Aristotle and his whole... This is very Aristotelian type language, right? It's we can say with some confidence that when we deploy this kind of a strategy, or when we, are appealing to da-da-da-da-da, this is a likely outcome, but not a guaranteed outcome. It's all that realm of the more and the less. We're still dealing with the same kind of realm of certainty that Aristotle was. We have a lot maybe sharper understanding of how the mind and body works, but there's still lots of variables, and there's still lots of uncertainties, and there needs to be this sense of this is not a guarantee. One of the terms that I want us to be kind of chewing on the back of our minds here as we're heading toward the end of this semester is the term prediction. So my work has been involved in food and ecology and taste now for about a decade, and I'm kind of evolving out of that, and I'm getting more interested in technology and the digital stuff and how it's affecting our brains and sociality and persuasion itself. And this thing that I keep coming up to is prediction. And it seems to me that the goal of like any advertiser, the goal of anyone who's trying to sell something, whether it be a product, a message, an idea, a policy, whatever you're selling, whatever you're promoting, wouldn't it be nice if you could just predict in advance what exactly you needed to do in order to get people to buy your product, accept your message, join your campaign, right? The guesswork is everything that we are studying about the nature of persuasion, right? Like the if and the variables and all the, the different possibilities. But prediction is, no, we just know, right? Guaranteed, certain, perfect knowledge. If we have that, we don't have to guess. We don't have to surmise. We don't have to use our inferential powers or whatever. We can just shoot the bullet straight at the target kind of thing, And so it's quite possible, I'm just sort of developing this theory now as I'm teaching this class, but it could be possible that the implicit goal of all persuasion is in fact prediction. Like, wouldn't it be nice if I didn't even have to persuade you and I can just push the button and get you to accept, buy, like, whatever, right? In any case, what we're doing here is we're trying to figure out all the stuff that kind of gets in the way of one's ability to predict with absolute certainty. So the goal of persuasion is to reduce the field of variables, the field of guesswork, the field of, stuff that might go wrong. Shrink it down. You might have done this in like a public speaking class where you do your like very casual kind of audience analysis task. The more you get to know your audience, where they're from, how old they are, are they from the coasts, are they from the middle part of the country, what is their, like, I don't know, do they have religion in their background, do they have, like, certain ethnic kind of heritage, whatever. You can guess at a lot of stuff the more you know, right? And this is why we're in this age of data, because these things have such an incredible ability to gather up data, and the whole point of the data gathering is to generate stronger predictions. So that persuasion, I have developed this theory now for the last few years, is that we might be moving into like a post-persuasion world because we know so much. And it feels like we don't want to persuade, we just want to know. And we now have the ability to gather so much data. Think about how much data Facebook has about you or Google has about you. And the whole point is to like get around any kind of resistance. Well, you can do that the more knowledge you have, the more data you have. In any case, prediction, just think about prediction as the kind of like, I wonder if that's the kind of the arrow that all persuasion wants to kind of go toward, right? Persuasion is what we do because we can't predict. Is that like a fair hypothesis? In any case, the reasoned action model is a slightly older model. It comes out of the 70s, and there was still this, I think it was starting to change around the 70s, but there was still this kind of investment in, as I talked about last week, the kind of the rational actor. This is a modern kind of assumption. It goes back to like, was it, who's the invisible hand guy? Adam Smith, right? And some of the early economic theories that just kind of, blindly assumed that we were all rational actors, which means that we were always processing at a high level, as what he would say in the next model, the Elaboration Likelihood model. He would call this like the central processing route. Those old models assumed that we were always doing this all the time, and that what you needed to do is to appeal to people using the highest form of reasoning and facts and data, and all we do all day is just receive facts in our brain, and there's a little guy with a calculator in there going, nope, that doesn't make sense, don't do that, or that makes good sense, go and do that, and that's just all we do all day long, right? Well, the theory of reasoned action is essentially a kind of a model that's rooted in that set of assumptions, and that's probably why we're going to move on from this model pretty quickly. It breaks down things into their useful kind of elements, but it doesn't sort of have a robust sense of how people actually process things, and that's the next model gets better at that. But Yeah, look at some of the language. The second point here in the notes is that the model assumes that people rationally calculate costs and benefits. Again, so it doesn't matter what it is. It's like, where should we go for lunch? Well, let's think this through, right? All the different reasons that we should go for salad versus the Mexican place. Or maybe there's an new Indian place. Like, let's break down the 15 different reasons and pros and cons and costs and benefits. Like, how often do we do that? Versus, ooh, that place is new, let's go, or whatever. That's more of that peripheral kind of thing. In any case, this model, the reasoned action model, assumes that we're all doing this all the time, more or less. And so what we need to do is just try to always be appealing to the rational cost-benefit kind of calculation. Now, the third note here starts breaking things down. I said we were interested in the elements. So what are the elements here of this model? Well, first of all, we've got the attitude toward the behavior. So you should stop smoking. All right, what's your initial attitude? Yeah, I probably should, or it's fine. Smoking's sexy, right? Next is the subjective norm. Now, that's sort of like the voice of normality in your brain. So you can think about that as like your closest classical traditional authority figure, whether it's your parents, your mom, a teacher, your coach, your boss, right? Them speaking like what you should do and what's a good idea to do. I'm always saying to my son, you should eat more frequently instead of having like huge amount of food all at once, right? Like, try to stagger your meals out more regularly. That's the subjective norm thing, is sort of like, what you should do and what's typical. And then we have the intention toward the behavior, and then we have the behavior itself. So this model kind of breaks things down into these component parts. I've noted that, the attitude breaks down into behavioral beliefs, right? Just what are your beliefs about the behavior, but also splits it up into outcome evaluations. Like, if I were to do this, if I were to quit smoking, what would be the outcome? Good, bad, otherwise, right? So it's breaking things down into their relevant kinds of things that are involved in the business of persuasion, and things that kind of come to bear, right? And all the different kind of components here. So number 4, this model uses a mathematical formula. So you'll notice on the page where it gives the Likert scale between 1 and 5 or whatever. How likely am I to quit smoking? What's my initial attitude against that? Well, I'm maybe at a 4 because I'm young, I'm not too concerned about it, right? Or I could be at an 8 because I had a relative die recently of lung cancer, and that increases the initial attitude, right? The subjective norm thing is like my parents, my coach, my boss, my girlfriend, boyfriend, my grandparents, like everyone I know is telling me I have to quit smoking because 3 people in our family or friend network have died because of this. So that subjective norm thing really kind of cranks things up. But there's an actual kind of like calculation, right? It's like initial attitude plus subjective norm, plus intention, and then likelihood to actually act. Now, that's an interesting way to kind of get going on some of like the assumptions and the elements of persuasion, but there's some stuff that's like not terribly satisfying here. Number 5 there, this theory offers a framework for predicting behavior from attitudes. Well, it gets us going, right? And behavior can be predicted, but you need to consider both the likes and the dislikes, attitudes, and people's natural propensity to want to please others, right? So those are the main elements, attitudes, norms. The main shortcoming, number 6, is that it assumes that people have control over their behavior. This is a big one, right? So like, think about how many times your attitude is that you should make a change. I should quit smoking. All my friends, my parents, my boss, anyone who's important to me all agree that I need to quit smoking, but I'm not going to quit smoking. Why? Because there's other factors. There's addiction, right? There is social pressure. I gave up drinking 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I was just doing too much drinking. It's like took over my life too much. It's like I need to just kind of like stop this. So I did, and I have, and the drinking part itself wasn't even the hardest part. It was the social part, right? It's the fact that like you still have, lots of friends who are like, hey, let's go get a drink, or let's go hang out, or let's go pop in here and get a drink, or like, you want to do some shots? And it's like, it makes it hard, even if your intention is there and everyone that, constitute your norms, everyone's saying the same thing. It's hard to actually do it. So this theory, this model is limited because there's other stuff to consider. There is the grip of your body, frankly, right? Especially when it comes to things like changing diet, changing, lifestyle kind of stuff. There is not just addiction, but even just habit, right? Stuff that we do, we're comfortable with. Think about how many things that we do that aren't maybe great to do, but we do them because they're comfortable, habitual, familiar, right? And even if we have an attitude to stop doing them, and even if we have the means to stop doing it, and even if everyone we know thinks we should and says we should, we still don't, right? So there's a lot of other things that kind of push back against the reasoned action model, but it's a good way to kind of get going on some of the stuff that's involved here. So that's good for that first one. And I'll try to bang through the next one too. So Elaboration Likelihood, you'll notice this just comes about 35 pages in the book after that first one. And if the first ones came out in the 70s, these other ones are like now in the next generation. This is like 80s and 90s. So I think reasoned action was seen to be a kind of static and segmented thing. Static in the sense of like, we can't just reduce human behavior and psychology down to like inputs and outputs. It's not just that easy, right? So we turn to Elaboration Likelihood, which is one of two process models of communication. And this is interesting. So in that first paragraph, it says at the end there, in order to rectify these problems with the earlier stuff, scholars proceeded to develop process-based models of persuasion. Right, so persuasion is this kind of very fluid and dynamic and ongoing and sort of unpredictable process. So it's best to be thinking about some of the kind of the areas of activity, right? And so here we get into these different routes of sort of cognition. So yeah, we're dealing with dual process. So we have dual process. We have kind of two main factors that we're thinking about or routes that we're thinking about with respect to like when and how intensely we engage in the actual act of persuasion from the like recipient side of things, the individual side of things. So we got central and peripheral. Now, as I was reading this, I was thinking about this book here, which I just pulled off my shelf. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow. This is by Daniel Kahneman. He is a economist. I believe he's a Harvard economist. And this book won the Nobel Prize. So this is a major work. And this business of thinking fast and slow is essentially exactly what they're talking about, what he's talking about in this chapter. I think this book must have come out after the Perloff book. But it's dealing with much the same stuff. Oh, actually just 1 year, 2011. So maybe they're drawing from the same kind of reservoir of scholarship. But the idea here is that our brains basically operate, Kahneman says we have these two systems, right? We've got the fast system and we've got the slow system. And that's essentially what this section is talking about with the central and the peripheral. The central would be the slow system. That is intense, focused, deliberate, intentional, chewing over a question, picking it apart, ruminating and studying and analyzing whatever the kind of message communication is. And then the fast, what Kahneman would call the fast system, is the peripheral system, right? Now, here, think about, I put this in one of the comments here. Number 8 at the bottom of that first page. Think about how much of the day we operate on autopilot. I sometimes stop and kind of reflect on just how many decisions I've made throughout my day that were just like boom, 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 boom. When you're pulling into the Starbucks drive-thru and you're not exactly sure what you want yet. Do I want to go with the espresso? Do I want something a little bit fancier? What is it that informs those decisions like in a split second? Just think about like what you're looking at. Think about what grabs your attention. Maybe you see someone in front of you whose arm reaches out and there's this big heaping thing of whipped cream, right? And you're like, you can go in two directions. You can look at that whipped cream and you'd be like, ooh, whipped cream. I had a terrible sleep last night and I'm in a foul mood this morning. Whipped cream sounds so good, I'm going to get that, right? Or maybe it's like you just gorged out last night, you ordered a bunch of food late, you feel gross about yourself, you see someone grab the whipped cream. By the way, whipped cream at Starbucks at 7 o'clock in the morning is a totally normal thing now, which still blows my mind. I still marvel every time I see the hand go out and it's like, hey, there's a big sundae. Someone's getting a sundae for... Anyway, maybe you see that and you think to yourself, ew, gross. I cannot. No way. I'm getting the, like, 2 shots of espresso and an ice water. I'm out of here. So it's like, what is it? And that's all peripheral, right? You're just like grabbing little cues. You're grabbing little signs, gestures, images. It could be smell, right? I mean, how many times have you smelled something and been like, I need that? Or, oh my God, get me away from here, right? That's all peripheral stuff. It's opening just slightly below or at that kind of level of conscious awareness, right? So this chapter is really talking about thinking fast and slow, and it's basically saying when we are confronted with a persuasive communication, we'll tend to engage in either central processing, which is intense, focused, chewing it over, or frankly, what's more likely is we engage in peripheral processing, right? So these are the 2 routes that our brain, our cognitive routes that we take to kind of get through this persuasive encounter. So that takes us through 5, 6. So we're doing both. We're both peripheral and central. It's not like we're all one or all the other, obviously. Now, number 7 is quite interesting. So when are we more than the one or the other? Now he introduces 2 more things worth thinking about in terms of when do we do one versus the other. So we get now motivation and ability. And I think this motivation question is really interesting. So if you look at the top of 9, the stuff that he's talking about in those few pages there are pretty important. So take a good look at that. This question of motivation and its relationship to central processing, and this idea that motivation is high when personal involvement is high. Kenneth Burke has a reading that I've given my undergrads before. It's just a quickie little thing, comes out of, I believe it's Permanence and Change, and it's called Occupational Psychosis. But he starts off by talking about interests, and he says, you can persuade a man by dealing with their interests. We are all persuaded, potentially, about things that interest us. If it doesn't interest us at all, if our motivations are not wrapped up in something at all because we couldn't care less about it, it doesn't affect us, it's not anything related to our lives, then you can't really persuade someone, right? So in order to persuade, you need to kind of like generate that buzz around one's interest, right? So personal involvement, things that affect us directly, things that we care about because they affect us. We are self-interested creatures, right? Always are and always will be. At the end of the day, again, Kenneth Burke, we are symbol-using animals. This is the definition of man essay. He says that, humans are symbol-using, but they're symbol-using animals. And he even says how much of our symbolicity comes from our language use and how much of it comes from our animality. He talks a lot about interests, about like material interests. Think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You've got like safety and survival and food and drink and, it's like taking care of basic needs. We can't avoid this kind of stuff. This is what I'm saying. Like if you're hungry, you might be more inclined towards something or less inclined towards something. That's our animality. It affects our ability to be persuaded. It affects and intersects with our motivations. It hugely drives how it is that we focus on something or whether or not we focus on something. Why do we stop and listen? If we're walking across campus, there's all these people that are, hey, can I interest in you this? Hey, do you care about sharks? Hey, do you care about waste? Hey, do you care about... There's all these different interests, and we usually just kind of walk past it all. Why? Because it's not interested. Doesn't interest me. But then there's something you do care about. You care deeply about it. The environment, homelessness, the prostitution, whatever your interests are. Now, think about why it is you're interested in that. Chances are because someone in your orbit, a family member, a friend, a loved one, a former loved one, whatever, because it affected them. Something touched you about this phenomenon. It's, I think, pretty rare for anyone to get really kind of worked up about something that has nothing to do with them at all. You know what I mean? So think about the relationship between motivation, personal involvement, and one's ability to be persuaded, but also one's level of involvement in terms of central processing, right? It's like when you really care about something, you're going to focus more on it, and you're going to also be a lot more, you're going to scrutinize any kind of persuasive messaging a lot more intently, right? It's because this matters. It's in my best interest to really engage this message and to chew it over. And so the messages need to typically be a lot stronger. The arguments need to be strong in order to land, right? So I'm quite interested by all of this stuff on motivation, its relationship to personal involvement, or what I also call salience, right? Is like we are motivated by that which is salient, by that which appeals to us directly. So these things are all kind of woven together. Yeah, number 10, under high involvement, argument quality exerted a significant impact on attitudes toward the question. When we are personally involved, we are more motivated, hence draw on central processing, hence pay sharper attention to reasons. Yeah, cool. So this model is vastly better than the just purely reasoned action model because it's getting at proclivities, right? It's getting at the more and the less, and that's this process business of it's really difficult to say at the outset when someone is going to be more disposed or less disposed, but this model helps get at more of the nuance of like when and under what situation or what conditions people will kind of perk up and pay attention, or when they don't, and therefore you can conceivably kind of slide things past more easily, right? So we are more susceptible to kind of shoddy forms of persuasion when we are engaged in that peripheral processing, when we're just kind of going about our business, and it's like, okay, what do I want for lunch? When we're in that kind of like not thinking about it too much, kind of just kind of going through, we got our phones out, someone's chirping in our ear, we're thinking about our class after lunch, and it's like, what do I want? Okay, I don't know. In that moment, we make decisions, and it's interesting to think about just how susceptible we are because we're kind of open, right? It's like, I don't care too much. What is it that finally kind of triggers us to go in this direction, that direction? I'm going to get the bowl. I'm going to get the combo plate. I'm going to get the iced tea versus the soda. We're making decisions about these things based on split-second calculations about, well, I had this for breakfast, I'm going to have this for dinner. You know what I mean? And all of that stuff is persuading us, but a super quick and low-level kind of way. All right, 30 minutes for 2 readings is actually pretty good. It's a longer total video, but it's 2 smashed together. So hopefully that's pretty good. I think it's a pretty good kind of opening bit of groundwork, thinking about some of the relevant factors and elements that go into this business of persuasion, what to be thinking about, what matters, what exerts force. So that's week 2. Be thinking about some of the common themes here. Be thinking about some of the like questions, when things work, when they don't work. Think about alternative ways of maybe challenging these models. We're always going to be asking questions about like, is this true? When is this not true? And then next week we're going to look at 2 more theories. What do we got? Inoculation and cognitive dissonance, I believe. Now I know that there's an inoculation kind of little internal thing in here, but I think I have a separate reading on inoculation. But go ahead and read the one in Perloff as well. Can't hurt. So there you go, gang. I hope that's cool. Hope you're all doing well, and we'll see you in another week. Cheers.